Welcome to the Just Third Way podcast, where we ask the question, would you rather own or be owned? Brought to you by the Center for Economic and Social Justice at CESJ.org. Hey, welcome to the Just Third Way podcast number 19. I want to apologize for some noises that I made. I was using a different mic setup, and apparently the mute was not working. So when I thought I was able to make some noise without it being recorded, I was mistaken. So I apologize to the listeners and to our guests for this podcast, Guy and Jeanna. Otherwise, thanks for tuning in. Here we go. Hello. I've got some special guests today. I guess you would call them our Heartland CESJ project managers. How about that title, you guys?
Good for me.
Sounds good to me, too.
And this is Guy Stevenson and Jeanna Casey. They have, in the past, done quite a bit of work basically promoting CESJ's core values, and particularly as they relate to the Catholic faith, because that's something that I think I can tell is, your heart, both of you. So I'm going to start with a question for Guy. Guy, tell me how you met Jeanna.
Well, I think it's if my memory serves me right, I think it goes back a number of years, and it was I believe it was on Facebook is where I first met her as a friend, and then we were connected with a couple Catholic groups, and then all of a sudden we started sharing quotes or experiences of reading, and which is part of our nature, and we came across a lot of the same material, and I had at the time been trying to draw a connection between Father Ferree with CESJ, one of the founders, and some of the other Catholic writings through encyclicals and things like that. And and at the same time, there's been this push for Fulton Sheen, now Venerable Fulton Sheen, to become a saint. And it started in my Peoria diocese, Peoria, Illinois, which is not too far from me. And that's I had a faith experience there in St. Mary's in Peoria, and that's another story. But the point is, we connected with Fulton J. Sheen's writings. So that's the short of how we got connected, and then we decided to develop a project together, and the rest is history.
Oh, that's great. That's great. So, Jeanna, I guess I was going to ask Guy how he found out about CESJ, but I already know that story, and it's going to take a minute. So why don't you tell me, okay, so did you first meet Guy and then find out about CESJ?
That's right. It was Guy who introduced me to CESJ, and he knew that I had been searching for an answer to the economic problems, and I think for me, I first understood what he was trying to tell me when he shared the video that he had put together. The interview of Louis Kelso was a 60-minute interview, I believe.
Uh-huh.
And that's when it really connected in my mind that, wow, there really is an answer out there. I can get behind something.
Well, that's interesting that you mentioned the economic problem I guess you were trying to solve in your head, because the one thing about, I guess, society and, our economic problems and the money system and things, it's amazing to me that more people aren't searching for an answer, because things are so screwed up, and the more you learn about it, the more you find just how broken this world is. And, people that are Christians like you and I know that, we need guidance from God, and that's the solution. And in my opinion, that solution is closest embodied in, the Just Third Way and CESJ's proposals and Kelso and Father Ferree. But it just fascinates me how so many people don't care. They're not looking for that answer. So that's neat that you were. Why do you feel that you were looking for that answer and so many people are not? You know.
Well, that is actually a pretty. It's a long story. I see if I can try to.
Well, I can't solve it, and we can't solve it today. But the interview that I did with Joyce Hart, I did, come a little closer to understanding. And she was saying, a lot of times it's people have to go through hardship before they're even thinking there might be a problem.
Yes, absolutely. For me, it was the housing crisis of 2008, and then being introduced to Bill Still's Money Masters video that kind of awakened in me the sense that there's something
Me
not
too.
right.
Yep.
Yeah, and then I kind of from there, I'd actually learned in catechism when I was in college. I took a catechism class, and I'd learned that socialism was very bad, and that even capitalism wasn't really acceptable. But at the time, I had been raised listening to Rush Limbaugh and had these ideologies in my mind, and I thought to myself, well, what does the Catholic Church know about economics? The Church should stay out of economics. And it wasn't until, the housing crisis that it really hit me that I'm kind of being a cafeteria Catholic, and I'm just picking and choosing what I want to believe and not really believing what I believe the Church teaches objective truth, and I wasn't believing everything that the Church taught. And I'd always been critical of other people, but I wasn't being very critical of myself.
Well, that's good. That's good. So you started to realize that the whole boom and bust and the money game just, tore up our whole housing situation in the United States, and that caused you to look at where money's coming from and stuff, huh?
That's right. Yes.
Absolutely.
And at first, I found it very difficult to believe that something like that existed in this world. And so then I started looking more in depth as to what the Church taught and what even just history, pure history from a non-religious point of view even, like how we got here. And that's what I found the most helpful about Bill Still's Money Masters video was the history he presents. And I've come to realize now that his video, while it was a good springboard for me, it wasn't the end all.
Right.
And that he makes a lot of mistakes in there or misunderstandings in there. But it was good in that it got me into the whole idea that something really is not right here, and there's actually documentation out there that I can go seek out and start doing my own research and, kind of like what Ronald Reagan said, trust but verify.
That is very similar to the path that I took. One thing that was part of my foundation was I had actually delivered gasoline to a convenience store chain down here called Quick Trip, and the employees were very happy, and the ones that had been there for a long time had quite a bit of money in their retirement plan because they were owners of the operation. And so when I was searching for solutions, even after seeing that Money Masters by Bill Still, I was saying, if you're just creating money, with the government still in control and saying who gets what, it just transfers the power problem to the wrong people. So I was still looking for solutions. And when I found the ownership thing, I had already known that ESOPS were good. So that leads me to you, Guy, and that was similar to your experience as a financial planner, right?
Yeah, and I would like to just take leave for a minute from that question about the financial planning to your earlier question about the reason people don't see it or don't understand it. And I think the biggest reason is, in my opinion, is the indifference, either through lack of education or self-study or their own investigation. Like, that's what we found in common with Jeanna and myself and even Michael Graney, is that we all had a drive or an innate spirit that kept us always digging up more and more of the truth. And that's why I'm so enamored with Fulton J. Sheen, because the same questions that we ask today about our culture, about financing, about issues of politics and economics, he was addressing back in 1940 and actually 1925. And once I started reading some of the material that he had presented, he wrote, by my count, well over 80 different books and hundreds of pamphlets and brochures, and spoke in so many different venues as a speaker across the country and across the globe, that this man was just a true resource of knowledge, kind of like my mentor, Dr. Norman Curlin.
Right. You're so right. I remember as a kid watching, Fulton Sheen, and he just seemed like, a genius. I was like, how does this guy have all this stuff in his mind? It was just amazing.
In preparation to that question, I've often asked myself, how does somebody grow the intellect that he had? I mean, he was versed in several different languages, 7 is my count. And one of the biggest ones that he was able to help our government was Russian. He spoke Russian.
Wow.
And he was called before the Senate hearings on anti-American activity, not to be a witness to the corruption or the collusion of Russian, but he was called to give the definitions, which is so important and falls back to that indifference. People have been given the wrong definition about even common things like property,
right,
and ownership. And as a teacher himself, Fulton Sheen was first and foremost always addressing definitions and purpose of life and purpose of writing books. So anyway, that's where I first became enamored with the individual through his writing. And Jeanna and I really took a leg forward when she presented to me one of the books that I had not read yet because it was undiscovered. It was basically hard to find a copy of Freedom Under God. And that was written in 1940. It was taken from some of his public addresses that were done as early as 1938. So he was in the heat of the battle coming off of the labor movement in the late 20s and early 30s.
Yeah, that was right around the time of the Depression, too, which was so formative in so many people's minds in terms of, realizing.
Exactly. And the church,
screwed up.
The church played a role in that, and I think they were themselves torn between two sides, as they are today,
right,
between labor and capital. In fact, one of my postings today was from Leo the 13th. He wrote Rerum Novarum, which is absolutely an excellent first read on the church's position on economic issues. And it's titled Labor and Capital.
Wow.
So and Fulton Sheen, in some of his pamphlets, and I think the overtones of Freedom Under God, addresses that very encyclical. Even though that was written, that encyclical was 1891, but it was May, and I just attribute it to the May Day extravaganza of political and economic issues.
Right. So, Jeanna, you discovered Freedom Under God, basically, for us, for all of us.
Well, I guess so. I didn't realize that they hadn't read the book when I started posting the quotes. I always knew that Fulton Sheen was really revered for his communism and the conscience of the West. So that was part of my journey in trying to figure out how to move forward, was to read that book. So I got that book, and then while I was at it, I just bought every Fulton Sheen book I could find that was affordable, and my husband will attest to that. He's like, you bought more books than you can read in your lifetime, but I started reading that, and I just got so excited as I was reading it. I was practically like jumping up out of my seat as I'm reading these passages. I had to share with somebody So I put it on Facebook, and then the next thing I know, guys reaching out saying, let's publish this book.
Right. That's a great idea. It worked out good, too. That's good.
Yeah, Dave, if I could just interject, because Jeanna's absolutely right. The same enthusiasm and excitement hit me on my end. I just want to read the table of contents to you real quickly.
Sure.
First chapter is the relevance of religion. The second one is false liberties, then true liberty, the economic guarantee of human liberty, communism, capitalism, and liberty, the dignity of labor, liberty in labor, liberty in the state, liberty in the republic, limits of freedom, liberty and equality, liberty and asceticism, freedom and religion, and then notes. 284 pages, a sure genius. But that book, like Jeanna mentioned, the first 3 chapters were kind of like, oh, wow, that's interesting, religion and false liberties. But by the end of the 3rd chapter, when he starts talking about true liberty and the solution to the guarantee of liberty, just blew my mind away. And that was the economic guarantee of human liberty. And you'd have to read the book, you'd have to buy the book to find out what the answer is. But it comes down to one of the core principles of CESJ, and that is own or be owned.
That's right. Yep, I read the book. It's a great book. So as far as the project, it became a CESJ thing, right? In other words, if I promote, people going to Amazon and looking to buy it or whatever, so it helps CESJ in some form or another if they buy it, doesn't it?
Yeah, we had to get a lot of advice, but first we had to come up with a product, which was to digitize the old manuscript.
Right. So you had to scan, do character recognition, then go back in and edit.
Well, it was more than scan, and it was hand pecking every character.
Wow.
Because I think it's been over 7 years, but very close to that, and we really didn't have the technology of scanning. Today, you can scan something and it can take the characters, but we painstakingly went through every line, and we did find some errors in that text, but very few, mostly from our generation. But we then found an editor to edit and proof it, and since Michael Graney had experience in that realm, I asked him to help us facilitate that, and then after several meetings with the board, they decided, and then also checking with their legal counsel, that they decided that they would go forward with reprinting and publishing it, because it was copyrighted back in 1940.
Right.
But the statute had run out for copyright, and so we took advantage of it. And it literally was one of several books that just have fallen on the dust heap of history. The reason why that's important is because I had a question as to why did it fall on the dust heap of history. And through Jeanna's investigation and Michael's and myself, we found out other things that were happening underneath the surface, what I call the real Red Star collusion story that was happening inside academia and within the Catholic Church and basically all faiths.
That's, the big money manipulators behind everything are interested in having conflict and, promoting collectivism so that, the people who are naturally in favor of individualism are going to be, arguing against that, and then that becomes a diversion, and then people can't, find out that there's other solutions that can bring people together, because if they did that, the ones that have, the control would lose their control. So it's the same story over and over.
It's definitely a power struggle, and the players are interesting in that whole breakup. And I think what it helped do is solidify, well, what's next for you guys? And Michael's taken on a project of his own that addresses much of the undertow of that time back in the 1940s and even a little earlier as to what was happening in academia, what happened to Fulton Sheen, him personally, which he never spoke about, but he gave hints as to what was going on, and the public newspapers, now that those have been digitalized, you can see some key characters or players. Monsignor Ryan, J.A. Ryan, played a key role in undermining everything that Fulton Sheen was doing.
Wow.
And so that's going to come out, and Michael's already, both Jeanna and I have read excerpts of that new book. We're just waiting for the approval process through CESJ. But I swear that book, what I've read of it, is going to be a barn burner.
Oh, good.
Because it's packed with a lot of history and information of what was going on not only then, but you can see the same legacy going on today.
Right.
So I don't know how we progress through CESJ in the Just Third Way without correcting some of these fundamental errors that have happened in the past. And Kelso knew it, Mortimer Adler knew it, because their first two books that came out, and what did they do in the first early chapters? They gave definitions to what the meanings were of property and the meanings of capitalism and communism. And then once you clarify the proper definitions, then they know where their places are, and then all the solutions start to unfold from there. But
Well, Jeanna, I want to thank you for discovering that book. That's really amazing. I had not even heard the story behind it. I didn't know. I thought maybe Michael had called you guys and said, "Hey, are you going to do something for us or what?" But you actually found it, huh? So where did you find it?
You know, I went to, Michael had recommended 8 books to me when he was recommending lots of books at the time. Guy had introduced him to me on Facebook, and we were in a different Catholic group, and we were having a lot of discussions at the time as I was going through a lot of questions and looking to fine-tune the answers, not just kind of, I feel like I had been given pat answers my whole life. And Michael was the only person I've ever met who was able to give me an answer that actually made sense and, was based on solid principles.
Right.
And at the time, he'd say, well, read this book, read that book, read this book. And there was so many, I was trying to buy every single book he ever mentioned. But, it was kind of expensive if you just go to Amazon. He said, well, have you tried 8 books? It's cheaper there. And I discovered 8 books then, and I just bought.
Is that a website?
Yeah, 8books.com. It's kind of a collective website that different sellers can sell through. So you get access to a whole plethora of different online sellers and the books that they have to offer. It's even cheaper than getting things on Amazon because you have to pay $3.99 shipping no matter what. And a lot of these, it'll be $3 for the book and free shipping.
See, ABE books. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay, I found that. I've never seen that before, so this is already helping me. I'm going to check this out. Okay, go ahead.
So I went online, and while I was there, I just, I did a Fulton Sheen search, and I put in my cart every book that I could find that was, affordable, like I said, and a few of them, like Freedom Under God, I think I had to pay $20 for that one, but most of them were $3 to $5. And
well,
so
I was hoping that this was going to be a story about maybe when you lived in England and you found some basement book, storage room under some cathedral, So.
Oh, goodness, no. But I do credit having lived in England a lot in, I guess, my journey to this. I met, over the course of the 4 years that I lived there, I met 4 different Polish people, and they each had a part in helping me understand that life in Poland was still very, very difficult for the people there. I knew that through Pope John Paul that communism had fallen, and that, communism fell. Obviously, things must be good then. There's no longer communism. But I didn't realize how difficult the financial situation was. And one man I met, he told me when he found out I was pregnant with my 7th child, and he said, "How can you afford 7 children?" He said, "My wife and I have 2 children, and we both work. I have 2 jobs, and still every month we get together and we figure out which bill we're not going to pay that month."
Wow.
And I thought to myself, how can this be? Communism doesn't exist.
Right.
So that was kind of an invitation to me. I took it as an invitation to figure out, why is there not the culture of life in Poland, even though there's no communism?
Right. And now they are starting, there's some leaders in Poland who are really talking to Norm and interested in just third way. So they really do. They've been a microcosm of humanity right there, and they're just back and forth between freedom and oppression and communism, and yeah, it's a very interesting place and what they've been through.
Yes, absolutely.
So I can see that, how you would learn from them about problems.
Right, yes. And I just recently been introduced to the Blessed Jerzy Popoluszko, who is this amazing priest in Poland during the communist regime. And he was actually martyred in 1984, which, when I found that out, it kind of shocked me. I was like, that was in my lifetime.
Yeah.
And I've been reading through some of his homilies, and it's just beautiful, the way he prays and the way he explains the truth to people. And he does it in a very gentle way, but he's very firm about it, and I'm just really enjoying reading his stuff right now.
Tell me again, how do you spell his last name?
It's Popoluszko. It's Popiluzko.
Okay, yeah, I'm going to look for that. Wow. Well, Guy had told me that of all the people that he's interacted with, you really had sort of a depth of knowledge and the desire for more knowledge more than anyone. Isn't that what you told me, Guy?
Exactly. I think she's probably one of the hidden resources of some of the volumes that Fulton Sheen had read. I wanted to just mention, Jeanna, that I know your husband's maybe a little upset with the number of library books, but fortunately Fulton Sheen was not married, because he had 80,000 books in his library.
Wow.
Yeah, 80,000. I did a double take and double check on that. And
oh my goodness.
Those books now reside in the Propagation of Faith, the World Ministries or missions, and they've got them archived. So we checked with them. We checked with them early in our investigation to find out not only copyright but other materials that might have been along the same subject line as that Freedom Under God, and they were not very friendly. But that's again.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, and but anyway, so that could you tell us, Jeanna, what's the title of the book that you're reading on the priest from 1984? Because I've read some of his stuff, but I just want to make sure that because he was in that labor movement at the same time, and I believe 1984, at least his work, I think they just call him Father Jerry, don't they?
I'm not sure. Like I said, I've just come across this stuff within the last couple of months, but the book I have is The Way of My Cross.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, that's a good title. So,
Yeah.
Hey, Guy, I'm looking at my notes here. I didn't want to get too far away from hearing your story it's a great story about your work as a financial planner and how it caused you to come across Kelso's ideas.
Actually, I for all the young listeners out there, that I first came across Kelso and mostly Mortimer Adler, back in 1973, my senior year in high school. But
wow.
That dates me in a terrible amount, which I hate to admit. But I read his first book, The Capitalist Manifesto, and just as a sidebar, I find it so interesting that here's Kelso of the same mind about trying to. He wasn't really trying to defeat communism, but he wanted to write a ancillary to the capitalist or the Communist Manifesto that he titled this book the Capitalist Manifesto. And I think that was 1958. I could be wrong with that date, but I read that book then, and I put it on my shelf, not even thinking about it for a long time. In fact, I thought that that's the way the world turned, was capital ownership. Then I come to find out that it's not that way entirely. It's only for a select few. So
Right.
Anyway, I got into the financial services when the ag industry and manufacturing started to collapse in the early 80s, and went back to school and got into financial services, which is the only thing left. And then Ronald Reagan was the president at that time. I was doing pension design with a company and registered representative, which actually means you're at the point of contact with selling those plans. So I was familiar a little bit with the ESOP, but not familiar because there wasn't really a product to sell unless you wanted to go to be an attorney, because it's not invested in your standard regulatory products. So,
Right.
But I came across several individuals, including the plant manager, that had a ESOP plan through their employment. And as I mentioned to you, it was a laundry service and uniform company, a local one, and it had been bought out by a larger national company. And so they went from a profit-sharing plan, the small service company, into this ESOP, and they transferred their holdings, the employees did, in order to save taxation. You could transfer to like kind, and so they found themselves in holders of this new company stock, and I don't want to mention the name of the company, but it was an ESOP. And these people had been working since they were 18 and 19, 20 years old, and they were doing what I call menial labor, like in a laundry company. You know, one was handling the dryer, and one was doing the loading.
Yeah.
Another one was a truck driver. Another one was so they were doing delivery, and another one was taking orders on the phone. So I came across, and these individuals, you know, after working there 25 years, the smallest amount that they had in their ESOP was $800,000.
That's just amazing.
And I, for the longest time, did not believe that the numbers here, and this was common through all these people once this package was to buy out and then go private. But they retired early. The youngest one retired at age 48.
Wow.
Wow.
And so I was impressed immediately by the power of that those ESOP holdings in a privately owned company. So at that point I became very animated as to what in the world am I missing here when I'm selling IRAs and selling pension plans, when an ESOP just blows things away completely. And then you find out there's an argument too, you know, you're not diversified, but I'm telling you, when you're owner of a company like these employees were, they were first-hand in what was happening management-wise and ownership-wise.
Wow. That's good.
They had, as Sheen said, a vested interest in what was being done with their toolboxes versus somebody else owning the toolbox.
Right. And that's interesting that you mentioned that there are some weaknesses, because I think it's important that we address that, because, you know, the ESOP concept itself is evolving, and we have the power to help control where it goes. And I was looking at a failed ESOP recently. In fact, Joyce Hart had made a post about it was it was a steel company in West Virginia, and it was the largest ESOP ever. And the problem with that ESOP, the reason it failed, is it was a business that was entirely dependent on the price of a commodity, which is steel, and a smart, large corporation, might realize that they're vulnerable to these boom and bust cycles and tariffs and everything else, and they could have diversified, but, maybe an ESOP, maybe there's an element to not wanting to diversify because, it's almost like this is our business and we're going to stay in this business. So,
Yeah.
maybe that's an element that needs to be brought in. But I was also real quickly going to say that that's the beauty of capital homesteading. It takes the concepts of ESOP, but you do diversify.
Exactly. That was the point I was going to make, because with all my experience, the ESOP is apples to apples is probably a better plan, but apples to oranges, capital homesteading is even better than that. And look at Kelso recognized that in the second income plan, and he was quite clear that the ESOP isn't everything. He was working with the tools and the forces that he had at that time, along with Norm Kurland, was to pass legislation, and thank goodness they got the ESOP through in 1974. Actually, I know there was plans before that, but in the RISA, it fell under a tax shelter in 1974, which simply meant that the employees did not have to pay taxes on the gain. I mean, can you imagine that example that I gave about those 6 to 10 employees that had $800 to $1 million plus in their accounts, having to pay taxes on that? As a larger, their taxes would be larger than your annual income.
Right.
So that again, thank goodness that Kelso came along and Dr. Kurland and helped initiate that into law through the tax section of 401 tax section. But anyway, that ESOP it does have flaws, but I think the greatest thing that I have seen with it is what they call a fully enhanced ESOP, which means that the ownership is transferred. In other words, just having a share with 100 other people as ownership, but making sure that there is not outside influences from a third party, like a private hedge fund that actually owns the majority shares. How are the owners or the worker owners ever to take responsibility if they don't have the power in the boardroom to make decisions?
Right, and that's something that we must qualify, that anytime we're, condoning ESOPs, we're talking about 100% employee-owned is the ideal. I know there's some that, still have, portions, and that's better than nothing, but 100% employee-owned and justice-based management. If you go to the CESJ.org website and look up justice-based management, then that's what we're talking about. And I'm saying maybe we should also add, when times are good, start diversifying, Incidentally, the name of that the largest ESOP ever was Wharton Steel, WEIRTON Steel. And it was floundering when they started the ESOP. It was like the town pitched in together and all said, we're going to buck up and take a loss and pitch in and become the owners of this thing because it's going down. But they actually turned it around and it did good for years. But then, steel got in a bad state with China flooding the market with cheap steel and, the story that goes along with every other steel related, business in the Midwest. And it just went back down. But
well, I would hope that someday through academia we'd have studies done on things like that, so you could actually find out how to best nurture a small enterprise or a large enterprise with an ESOP program, And I think that's part of the idea that Norm has got with the justice-based universities. I mean, academia needs a complete overhaul, in my opinion, and it needs to start in the business schools as well, because there's so much history. We're going to continue to repeat these boom and bust cycles. Just as Kelso said back in 1974 with a piece of the action, that these cycles are going to continue to happen with the amount of debt that we're doing. When you can do it without that consumer debt, you could do it with capital credit. You can finance these things. So I just hope that sooner versus later that has always been my prayer and hope that we would address that stuff. And the last thing I want to go back to Fulton Sheen is in his book he recognized this. He helped set up one of the first profit sharing plans back in the late 30s.
Wow, I did not know that.
And because he knew the players, he knew the principles and the philosophy behind capital ownership. And if the listeners have not read anything on Fulton Sheen, Jeanna mentioned Communism and the Conscience of the West. He has a whole chapter in there on economics. And then The Freedom Under God, which is the book I would prefer, because there are 8 chapters all on economic principles.
Right.
And I
would encourage people to go to Amazon and search for that, Freedom Under God, Fulton Sheen, and get the CESJ version. That should be the only one available, but
yeah,
that's for sure. And that's why Guy is known as Fulton Sheen Guy. And you received a letter from Cardinal Dolan, right? Is that great or what?
Yeah, I think after we got the book published, I mean, I know Jeanna was excited, I was excited, Micah was excited, and I think the most exciting thing was we finally got Dr. Norm Curlin to admit that he read the book after we had published it. But once we got it published, we started writing to get letters of endorsement, and we wrote to a large number of individuals and offered them a free, actually sent a free copy. And I also sent it to the mainstream media, and it's kind of like, once you get in the book tour, the book just gets highwayed and robbed, and they never say anything about it. But I was hoping somebody would say something about this old book. But I'm talking about on the media, but they didn't. I haven't seen anybody talk about it. But Cardinal Dolan, they sent letters. We sent letters to Cardinal Wuerl, several other cardinals. Cardinal George in Chicago is still alive. I sent him a copy, and but anyway, we got several responses. All of them favorable except for one.
Oh wow. That's
yeah,
interesting.
and that's where my tooth was ground a little sharper, because I knew that there was subversive activities going on back in 1938, and it just proved my theory that it's still going on.
Yeah, it's still going on. How about that?
Yeah.
Well, Jeanna, I didn't want to stay forever on the Fulton Sheen subject, but is there anything else you want to say about that before I ask you a little bit about homeschooling?
I can't think of anything else. I think we've covered.
Yeah, I think we have.
Covered it pretty well.
So what led you to want to take on homeschooling?
Well, when I went to college, I was trying to decide on a major, and my aunt and uncle at that point had just taken their kids out of the institutional school and decided to homeschool for some issues that they had been dealing with, and I thought, darn it, I'm going to have to homeschool my kids. So I majored in in education, and then when I got married, we agreed from the beginning that we were going to homeschool, and I didn't realize, I had been told all my life, oh, society's going to hell in a handbasket, and what are we going to do, and, wringing hands and whatnot. And at that time, I just had, this Republican view that if everybody vote Republican, things would be good.
Yeah.
And I didn't realize the full scope of the situation that that we find ourselves in today. But as we started homeschooling, and then I started doing research into, economics, and living in England also got me very interested in history, and just even in Christianity, there's a lot of conflicts amongst different Christians and the history there. And that kind of led me back into the education aspect. And I started reading what the church taught, what some different prominent homeschoolers had taught. I was introduced to John Taylor Gatto, and then I realized that there's all these little bits that kind of point, to something else, and that it pretty much supported each other. But it's not something that I saw, I was standing too close to the picture and looking at one spot and not standing back and taking in the whole scope of the picture. But at that point, I started to realize that this all works together here.
Right. So
and
it's kind of like the Catholic faith and studying, what God's will is for humanity and stuff, kind of made you realize that, there is what is the word when everything comes together, like a serendipity or something where
yeah,
there is a theme that comes together and a way to, and that's what you're teaching your kids basically.
Yes, yeah. I didn't learn history and like what was going on in the whole world. I learned it like in little snippets, like this happened here and this happened there and that happened there. And it wasn't until I started homeschooling that I started to realize that, like this is what happened in England while this was happening in the United States, and this is what happened in France at the same time. And all of a sudden pieces started to come together, and I started to see the situation that we find ourselves in today from a very different perspective.
Oh, I can see that.
And I want to make sure that my children, get taught that, and they don't have to wait till they're in their 30s
right,
to start
right.
learning about this stuff.
So when you take the truth of history then, and you also put the wisdom of like the just third way and people that have been sort of, I don't know, like Guy says, hindered from getting their message across throughout history. It's like, you're able to teach your kids something that there's no way they would get anywhere else. I mean, I'm assuming you went to school in a normal, like, I guess, public school, like when in high school and stuff?
Yeah, I kindergarten was my only public school, then I was Catholic school all the way through.
Okay. So how would you compare what you learned there to what your kids are learning? Is it significantly different?
I think it is. There was a lot of good things I did get from Catholic school, and even now, when I had my, my kind of conversion to the just third way, it was a lot of it based on little snippets that I remembered from different teachers or different books I'd read in school that I would not have read in a public school. But even then, a lot of our books were from the government. They were no longer hand-picked books by the school, because money was becoming tight. And so the schools were starting to, take a little bit of government handouts and whatnot. And so, like, pretty much all of our books, for the most part, were government books, and it didn't, like I said, didn't teach me the way that I'm teaching my children now.
Oh, that's interesting. So is there a certain curriculum that you would like to mention that people should check out if they want to homeschool?
Well, there's a lot of different ones out there. We've done Mother of Divine Grace for kindergarten through 8th grade. And then for high school, I got a little bit pickier in regards, as I was starting to learn about social justice, what it is, what it isn't. And I found that most of the curriculums out there, don't really know what they picked when it comes to teaching civics or government or economics. They've picked books that are probably the least bad, but they're not books that actually teach the truth.
Right.
Maybe have little snippets of it and whatnot, but most of them end up being kind of capitalistic.
Oh,
And
yeah.
there was
I
a
know when
time
my
when
kids bring them home, I'm like, I can't believe they're making you read this and they're telling you this.
right. So for high school, we switched to Our Lady of Victory because I really like their civics program, and
Oh, okay.
even that doesn't get into Kelso, and
Oh,
it doesn't
no.
get into Mortimer Adler,
I wouldn't
but
think so, yeah.
it does a really good job presenting history from a pretty accurate perspective, and also what the church teaches, and without going too far capitalistic or too far socialistic, it does a good job there. So that's probably the biggest reason I switched curriculums, was because I wanted the civics to be
Right.
spot on.
Well, I hear that. I was thinking, we try to consider what the world would be like if money was, you know, right, if it was how it should be. What do you think the percentage of parents that homeschool would be if we lived in a world of capital homesteading with capital incomes for all?
That's something I have pondered before, but I don't know that I could even begin to, imagine what it would be. I think that parents would be a lot more involved in their children's education,
That's what I
whether
think.
it's
They would have time.
absolutely, and whether it's homeschooling them or finding the suitable tutors for the certain subjects that they want. I think it would be a lot different than just like sending them off to the local school every morning.
Right. Well, I tell you, I think we need to get this Justice University concept off the ground that people have been talking about at CESJ. What do you think, Guy? I think we need to put Gina in charge of it.
Yeah, I think that would be great. K through 12.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Hey, both of you bring up a interesting point, though, and I'd like to take a slap at it. Was the question of the impact on capital homesteading?
Right.
I think one of the greatest gifts that I've had in the last 6 or 7 years was a fervent relationship with Dr. Curlin, because I could call him at a moment's notice or a drop of a hat and discuss the nature of these things.
Right.
I can remember quite vividly talking to him about the impact capital homesteading would have on the high incarceration rate in the United States. And you can just phantom. You might think twice about losing your check from your capital homesteading account or putting it on suspension if you were to break the law.
There you go.
And then also, it would probably create a whole culture of starting from the cradle to the grave. You would have children accumulating in their vested interests, and it wouldn't occur until at least 7 or 8 years, but they would start receiving a check, which would help them nourish or provide for them nourishment, food, and clothing to the family unit. And then above all else, when they make that final decision about college or not college, they at least would have, if they maintain their capital homestead accounts, would at least have a capital nest egg that they could liquidate and pay for the college if they so desired. Or if they desired that they wanted to start their own family, they would have a small stipends of income to help provide both husband and wife or newlywed would have a source of income or revenue to help at least during the primary years of their nurturing as a family.
That is so true. I mean, I look at, the way that families have to suffer through that time. And, you just want to walk up to these guys that are, newly out of school, have kids, trying to buy a house. And, I mean, I can see in the next 10 years I'll be in a situation finally where I could walk up to them and just hand them $1,000, because it's so much easier after you get over 50, to accumulate some money. And that's a crucial time. And if you had a capital homestead dividend coming in every year that you've been building your investment portfolio since birth,
Yep.
then that would be in a time of empowerment where you could, really focus on doing what's right.
Yeah, and you would have. I keep using the word vested interest from employees at a company, owning it. But same thing with children in their future education. They would have a vested interest because that money has been attached to them, or that capital ownership of income producing holdings have been with them for such a long period of time. And it's not foreign to our way of thinking culturally right now, but we have been prevented. Barriers have been artificially established, either knowingly or unknowingly. I don't even want to go into that argument, but
Really.
they have those barriers have been established in our culture, and there's very few solutions that are trying to break those barriers down. And just like Kelso said, all we're asking for is a piece of the action. There's a better way than all of this debt.
Absolutely.
And that's sustainable credit, capital credit that you can pay off and generate a future income. And most people will say, well, this is just too long term. We need short term solutions. I'm telling you, the best short term solution has a long term impact.
That's right. Oh, yeah. Well, everything has to be focused on the long term, I mean, unfortunately, that's just how it is. So
Yeah.
that's why I was saying, you know, we obviously have a lot of threats to freedom. One I was going to mention to you guys, because you're both strong Catholics, is this government mandating, health care, that Catholic hospitals have to force their employees, to have their contraception covered by, it's like crazy stuff, and although, the current administration is working to correct some of these things, a different administration could come in and change it right back. So, we
Yeah.
need long-term change. We really do. And I was going
Well,
to ask you guys if you
Dave,
had
I
any
don't want
ideas.
to jump in. Dave, I
Yeah.
don't want to jump in on your bandwagon, but that's another important issue in our culture. And look, at CESJ has done a lot of work in that area. They came up first with the one doctor plan, and very few people paid any attention to it. But look, if you had a capital homesteading account, which was tied into the CESJ one doctor plan, and all you'd have to do is look up CESJ and healthcare, and you'd find it. It's on their www.cesj.org, and you could see their plans, all their writings. But can you imagine if you were entitled to a home care or a health care provision in your capital homesteading account? I mean, you would actually start to become an owner of the facilities. And look, at the largest source of capital revenue for these doctors and whatnot isn't the work they do, it's the property they own,
Really?
the equipment that they own. And we could almost wipe out the healthcare problems if the people owned these pieces of medical technology.
It's a good idea. Never thought of that.
And that's Norm has talked about it, and it's partly in that the one doctor plan. But I'm just suggesting to you the solutions are not far fetched. They just have to find the right sounding board or a spokesman, like we had Huey Long help us get the ESOP plan through.
His son Russell, actually.
Yeah, Russell
Yeah.
Long, excuse me.
Right. Well, I want to, on behalf of CESJ, thank you guys both for all that you've done, and we're really grateful for your work on the Sheen project. Both of you are very, very, deep thinkers, and know that Guy has complimented you, Jeanna, on your insights about faith and the world in general. And I was going to ask you.
Thanks. Mostly I just quote other people.
Yeah.
I was going to ask you, Jeanna, if you'd ever consider becoming an author.
I don't feel like I'm really, like that's probably above my pay grade. I'm just I feel like a little peasant when it comes to this, Guy, Michael, Dr. Curlin, Don.
Maybe you could write some educational curriculum or something like that.
Possibly. I could probably put together a good book list of things I want students to read at least. But
yeah.
I'm fairly new to this whole thing, and I'm still learning, and mostly I just quote other people. I think that's really good. I have to share this.
Well, if you ever need anyone to help, you got Guy. He's capable, and myself, I'll help in any way I can.
All right. Well, thank you.
Well, I really appreciate both of you taking the time to talk today. I really personally learned a lot. It's neat the way each person that's active in our movement has some sort of gems of knowledge that, we need to get together and talk more and bring them out.
I want to thank you as well. I know my health has not been up to par for the last several years, and I just want to thank you for all that you're doing as well. I do look forward to the podcasts that you've been posting and the other things that you're doing to help the Just Third Way and the capital homesteading.
Thank you very much. You think I should do more rants or not?
Oh, no comment. No, you're fine.
That's funny. Believe me, I'm trying.
Yeah.
I think there's a place for the rants, but if you do it too much, I think it gets to be, just one of those things that people start to ignore you. So
yeah,
probably a rant here and there.
Okay. I'm trying a lot of different things, believe me.
Well, hey, stick with what's working. Put your Mike Huckabee face on and be pointing about what you're going to say.
Right. There you go. I'll do that. Well, thank you both very much, and have a great rest of your week, and we'll talk to you soon.
All right. Thank you, Dave.
Thank you.
God love you. Bye.
God bless you both. Bye.
All right. God bless you too.